Nobody had ever launched a medium bomber from an aircraft carrier before. Nobody thought it was possible. 16 crews volunteered to try it anyway. None of them expected to survive. This is one of the most extraordinary stories of the war. And most people have never heard of it. 4 months after Pearl Harbor, America was desperate for a victory. Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Doolittle came up with the craziest plan of the war: launch Army bombers from a Navy carrier and bomb Tokyo. What happens next will test the limits of human courage, ingenuity, and endurance. This is the Doolittle Raid. After Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt wanted to bomb Japan. But Japan was too far away for any land-based bomber. Unless you launched from a carrier. The B-25 Mitchell was a medium bomber. It was never designed to take off from a carrier deck. Doolittle proved it could be done. Barely. 80 volunteers trained in secret for weeks. They practiced short takeoffs on painted runway lines. They had no idea where they were going. On April 2, 16 B-25s were loaded onto USS Hornet. The ship sailed west into the Pacific with its precious cargo. The plan was to launch 400 miles from Japan. But a Japanese picket boat spotted the fleet 650 miles out. Doolittle had to launch early. At 8:20 a.m. on April 18, Doolittle was the first off the deck. The carrier was pitching in heavy seas. He used every inch of the flight deck. All 16 bombers got airborne. They flew to Japan at wavetop height to avoid detection. At noon, the bombers reached Japan. They climbed to 1,500 feet and bombed military targets in Tokyo, Yokohama, Kobe, and Nagoya. Japanese air defenses were caught completely off guard. They never imagined bombers could reach the home islands. The physical damage was minimal. But the psychological impact was enormous. Japan was no longer safe. The bombers could not return to the carrier. They flew on to China, hoping to reach friendly airfields. Most ran out of fuel. 15 crews crash-landed or bailed out over China. 1 crew landed in the Soviet Union and was interned. Chinese civilians risked their lives to help the American airmen. Japan retaliated by killing an estimated 250,000 Chinese in revenge. 3 raiders were executed by the Japanese. Another died in captivity. Most of the rest survived and returned home. Doolittle thought the raid was a failure. He expected a court-martial. Instead, he received the Medal of Honor and was promoted to brigadier general. The raid forced Japan to recall fighters for home defense. More importantly, it pushed Japan to attack Midway, leading to their decisive defeat. 16 bombers hit Tokyo and 3 other cities. Physical damage was minor, but the psychological impact was enormous. The raid contributed to Japan's decision to attack Midway. The Doolittle Raid proved Japan was vulnerable and boosted American morale at the darkest moment of the war. Its strategic consequences led directly to the decisive Battle of Midway. The people involved in this story became legends. Their bravery inspired generations. Many of the details remained classified for decades. Only now do we know the full story. Books and films have tried to capture this incredible story. But reality was even more remarkable. The veterans who lived through it rarely spoke about what happened. Some stories are too big for words. This was the Doolittle Raid bombing Tokyo after Pearl Harbor. One of the most remarkable stories of the entire war. The events described here shaped the world we live in today. The events described here shaped the world we live in today. The events described here shaped the world we live in today. The events described here shaped the world we live in today. The events described here shaped the world we live in today. The events described here shaped the world we live in today. The events described here shaped the world we live in today. The events described here shape the world we live in today. The events described here shape the world we live in today. The events described here shape the world we live in today. The events described here shape the world we live in today. The events described here shape the world we live in today. The events described here shape the world we live in today. The events described here shape the world we live in today. The events described here shape the world we live in today. The events described here shape the world we live in today. The events described here shape the world we live in today. The events described here shape the world we live in today. The events described here shape the world we live in today. The events described here shape the world we live in today. The events described here shape the world we live in today. The events described here shape the world we live in today.